Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today I'd like to continue on with our journey through the recent releases made by the Criterion collection during this year of 2020. And today I'd like to focus our attention on a film, a splendid work that is included in this absolutely essential set from Criterion, which is called Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project Number 3. An amazing set. I highly recommend it to everyone. This is a must-have on all accounts. And in this set, there are many films, among which is one that is given the spine number 1050. This is from 1972, and the filmmaker is Bahram Beyzaie. And the name of the film, and please pardon me for my poor pronunciation, is DOWNPOUR, or in English, Downpour. From 1972. This is from the great filmmaker and artist Bahram Beyzaie. This is the film DOWNPOUR, or Downpour. This film is often described as being one of those pioneering works that helped to usher in the new wave of Iranian cinema. And I think as an example of the cinema of Iran, I think we have a truly magnificent work that is operating on many levels. At its very basic, fundamental narrative level, it is about a young man, Mr. Hekmati, who is coming to this particular community, which is the south end of Tehran. And here he is a visitor, an outsider, but he comes into this community as a teacher. And from here, we get the story of his interactions with the community and with the children, and also with a particular young woman, and thus leads into one of the strands of narrative of the film, namely a budding love story between these characters, and also the kinds of comic hijinks that ensue vis-a-vis the community, vis-a-vis other rivals in love, and also his relationships with other members of the school and the school children, and how he is becoming part of the community that is slowly beginning to welcome him. And so this is, I think, the very essence of the story. And from here, I think we get a lot of very well-established narrative traits that could be described as being perhaps very accessible, of a universal nature. In other words, we get a love story, we get the outsider making or trying to adjust to this community. We see certain episodes of maybe miscommunication or differences in cultural appreciations and the like. But gradually we get, in this fish out of water type of story, we also get a very tender story about human relationships, about drama, about the sway of human emotion, and the push and pull, if you will, of desire, of wanting to fit in, of this kind of yearning and longing, which I think is something that we all can understand, whether we are from Iran or not. And so this is, I think, a very remarkable film in its direct accessibility. It is also a very comic film. It is a film that is filled with a lot of humor and substance and style, and there are a lot of well-composed comic shots that have a lot of very humorous effect. There are some really interesting shots of gazing, of staring, of observing, of looking. The children and the love story, and also the rival, and how these play out in very funny ways, as well as very tender and quite emotional ways at that. And also we have a very fascinating look in terms of the society writ large during this time, the early 1970s. So this is before the revolution, and this is, as I say, during the time where we have ushering in many different voices of the so-called new wave of Iranian cinema. It's very interesting to note that, again, according to the Criterion materials, he made this film based on very limited resources, and so he had to essentially ask permission to use this actual location of a school and this location, this community in this part of Tehran. And so in that way, and he also had there was a certain degree of spontaneity, and also trying to think on the spot how to frame a shot, how to use the camera. And so there's a lot of freshness, of innovation that you can feel when you watch the film. And according to Beyzaie himself in the interview, he says that when he started shooting, he didn't yet have the completed script, and so he still had a story that was, at least at the time of starting, not complete. And so this gives rise to yet further indications of the improvisational nature of a lot of the filmmaking aspects. And Beyzaie himself acknowledges that he had to use what was available to him. That was also due to the relatively limited nature of the funds that were being relied upon, etc. So this is all to say that this kind of artistic creative environment apparently seemed to lend itself very nicely to using the locations, using the people, using the community that the story is set in. And so in many ways this is also an interesting look at a certain aspect of Tehran. And when looking at it in that context, I think this film gains a lot of prominence and a lot of sort of significance when we see the kinds of stories that are being told. And incidentally, or maybe not so incidentally, we should keep in mind that in this context, Beyzaie, and he acknowledges this point himself, I think quite rightly, Beyzaie is telling a story that is about a young man, a young intellectual, that seems to be relying not so much on studies of religion, but other types of intellectual pursuits. And yet he comes to this community and he tries to make some kind of contribution to this community, whether it be using his intellectual roots or maybe using other means that we later discover are at his disposal. And that becomes one of the through lines of the narrative as to how he becomes part of the community, Mr. Hekmati. And so so that's an interesting aspect in terms of the idea of intellectualism, of the intellectual in the context of this society, and also the idea that the story is also involving a lot of female characters, and not just one female character, but many. And we see their lifestyles, we see their the daily living and the daily work that each of them have to go through. We see a lot of their interactions with the community around them. We see them about things that they are passionate about and care deeply about, whether it be their family or their work, or simply being treated with respect in daily situations. And so I think Beyzaie in the interview makes the point rather interestingly so, that his film is one of those pioneering films for many reasons. One of which being, in fact, that he is focusing in on female characters in this very intimate and very respectful way, and giving the characters a lot of room to breathe and to live in the space of the film. And so it's capturing a lot within the frame and within its running time, and I think is well worth remembering and well worth absorbing and paying attention to as we are watching this. And also, let me just return to the fact that it is also a really refreshing and invigorating comedy that seems to be playing with a lot of visual tricks and styles. It seems to be trying to play with certain modes or tropes of cinema. There are sort of heroes and villains in a manner of speaking, but in fact, when you think about it, these aren't really heroes, these aren't really villains, these are human beings with strengths and weaknesses all the same. And so I think we can begin to realize that we are watching a film that is about a community, that is about human beings, that is about people. And we see that Beyzaie's camera is really helping to take care and to capture the people in this moment, and to capture them in what they do, and in this particular part of Tehran, as I say. So there is in a way, I don't want to call it neorealist, but there is in a way a sense, something of the real and the corporeal that and the earthy that is here, as well as being something that is very lofty and very light and very energetic and bubbly in terms of its comedy and romance, as well as other tones that I think are very brilliantly using certain metaphors or certain modes of narrative thematic cinema to speak to potential political themes and aims and concerns of the filmmakers, and so which is actually a trait that is really addressed quite well in the essay, and I'll get to that in a moment. And so this is all to suggest that there's a lot here in this great film, Downpour, Ragbur. So you've got to check this out if you haven't already. It's so much fun, and it's so emotional, and you care about the characters, and it becomes this there are moments where you just laugh out loud, and there are moments that are just so touching and heartwarming and amusing. You're going to have such a great time when you watch this film, I guarantee it. So this is the film Downpour. Now, speaking of the Criterion Collection, we have this restoration of this film. Now, one of the great things about this set, the World Cinema Project sets, this is number 3, of course, one of the great things is we get information about how these films were really painstakingly restored. A lot of hours were devoted to bringing these films back from the brink, and this film, Downpour, is one of them. And I strongly urge you to check out the supplements for a lot of reasons, but one of them is to get the story about how this film was essentially rescued, what happened to this film, what happened to the surviving prints of this film, how they were destroyed, and that the only surviving print that the restorers could find was that which was in the possession of the filmmaker himself. And so it was in very poor condition, unfortunately, and it had burnt-in English subtitles. And so this is the only print that they could use. And still, we have this as the basis for the wonderful restoration, which is part of what we get in this set today. So what we do get, I should be very clear here, it is the print that has burnt-in English subtitles in it. So it's not like you can turn on or turn off the subtitles with some push of the option button. No, this is using the subtitles, English subtitles that are in the print itself. And so what that means is it has white printing, the font is white in color, and so it's white lettering on a black and white film. So every once in a while, it's very hard to make out, because if someone is wearing a white shirt, or if it's against a white background, white lettering against a white background is oftentimes difficult to read. And so it's not true for everything, but there are the occasional moments where I found it a little bit difficult to read, but that was no fault of the print itself. Also, I should point out that there are moments where there's, let's say, text that's shown in the film, the opening titles, for instance, and other parts in the middle of the film. There are moments where you see text, and there are some moments of dialogue where you either read text or you hear someone speak, and there's no subtitle that appears. And so I'm left wondering, what does this opening title mean, or what does it say, or what does this text say? I have no way of knowing, because I cannot speak or read the language. And as I say, there are moments where a character is speaking dialogue, but there's no subtitle, so it's hard for me to keep up. These aren't so prevalent, that these gaps aren't so prevalent that it somehow robs one of the experience of watching this film. You can still keep up, and these moments, I think, are few and far between, so don't worry about it as far as the overall experience goes. But just keep that in mind. Every so often you might notice that, and so just be patient with the film, and don't worry, because there's still a lot of time for catch-up, and those gaps, as I say, are few and far between. I suppose I could say that it would have been perhaps an interesting option, maybe for the Criterion collection, to still provide their usual electronically placed subtitles over the print. I think that would have been very helpful. And I suppose they decided not to do that because of the existence of the burnt-in English subtitles in the print itself. And so I can guess that that's probably the reason, although I still think that the film could have been made I mean, it could have helped to fill in some of those gaps if we had, say, a Criterion produced subtitling. But in any event, we still get subtitles, so just keep that in mind. And the print looks fantastic, and it sounds great. So we're getting something that was essentially just, you could never get it in this kind of condition before. And so it's really great. It's a cause for celebration. And then to continue on, we have the Martin Scorsese introduction, which is about 2 to 3 minutes. And this is essential. This is a great primer introduction to the film. It doesn't give anything away, but it gives a little bit about Beyzaie himself, and the kind of artist that he is, and also the import of the significance of the film, and also some words about the restoration process. But then we have a 29-minute interview with the filmmaker Beyzaie himself, and he is talking to us about many aspects of his views on the cinema of Iran leading up to the making of Downpour. And he then talks about the production details of Downpour, which I made reference to a little bit earlier in this video, about how there were very limited resources and funding, and he had to make do with what he had available to him using the particular environment, how this therefore became in many ways a kind of film that was about Tehran itself, filmed in a very unique way. And also he talks about working with the actors and developing the story, and his take and his own interpretation of the story. He also focuses in on the fact that his story does focus on a lot of female characters seen in a way that perhaps they weren't necessarily seen in other films of this contemporary time. So that is very interesting in and of itself. And speaking of which, he talks also about, for example, the music. The music score of this is one of those great characters of the film. It has a lovely comic tone, a nice push and pull, a little bit of a kind of a comic pursuit type of quality to it. And the music is by Sheda Garachedagi. And Garachedagi is this is very important because we learn from Beyzaie that she is one of the earliest pioneers in terms of female artists and the creation of musical soundtracks. And so, and it's wonderful to hear Beyzaie's comments about her and working with her, and how she was really intuitive and knew what Beyzaie was looking for without Beyzaie necessarily needing to tell her a lot. She seemed to pick it up almost immediately. And so, and the score, it's, as I say, it's a wonderful, lovely, bouncy, rhythmic score. So this is Sheda Garachedagi, wonderful score. And so it's wonderful to hear Beyzaie's comments about her. And then we have wonderful interpretations, as I say, from Beyzaie himself about the work itself, about what it means, its significance. He talks about a particular line that the main character says, "It's no use," and what this line actually means. And he then talks about how this film was a film that was before the revolution, and then he talks about subsequently what happened to this film, what happened to him, how he lost his job, and how the prints were ultimately destroyed, are treated very, very poorly. And so that led to the print that he had in his possession being relied upon for the restoration. So we're very, very fortunate. When we hear Beyzaie's comments about this, we're very fortunate that the print survived in the way that we did. Otherwise, I don't want to think about the what could have happened had that not occurred. So we are very, very fortunate in that way. So in that respect and many others, I think this is a brilliant interview with Beyzaie, and the way it ends. I don't want to spoil the interview, but there's a real touching way that it ends, and he makes a point that is a very autobiographical one. And so stick around for the end of the interview. It's one of the most touching ways to end a particular supplement. So bravo to Beyzaie, and bravo to the Criterion Collection for having this great one. And then we have to go to the booklet, and I've mentioned the booklet before, and I'll mention it again. It is absolutely stellar. On page 7 of the booklet, we have the cast and crew breakdown, and it's wonderful, so it's great to have there. And then starting on page 62, we have the essay on the film. The essayist is Hamid Naficy, and this is called Furtive Glances. This is absolutely top-notch, essential reading. You've got to read this, and read it many times, my friends, because you're going to get a great background primer on Beyzaie. You'll get a great background primer and description of the cinema of Iran, and the specific names of what makes up the so-called new wave generation of Iranian filmmakers, and also specific groupings as well of these filmmakers that the essays goes into. So this is really fascinating stuff, and how Beyzaie himself fits into these various, let's say, categories, if you will, of filmmakers that make up this new wave cinematic movement. And also really fascinating information about how the cinema got a lot of support. This is, of course, before the revolution, but it got a lot of support at the time from the government, and so which is a really interesting point. And then the essay goes into a lovely dissection and discussion of the film. And we have the essays discussing the idea of looks and the gaze and observations, and makes such a really pointed observation about how this can be seen as being a veiled or cloaked metaphor for a sort of political, a political metaphor for the idea of observation and gazing and surveillance in terms of the National Domestic Intelligence Service, SAVAK, SAVAK. And so this is a really interesting point in how this is an example of how we can look at this film. And for those who are more learned and more expert in the history of the history of Iranian society and politics during this period of the 1970s, I think there's much room to look at this film as having a lot of these veiled and indirect and cloaked metaphors that speak to these certain specific political outcomes. And I think one of those perhaps has to do with something that I referred to earlier, which is one of the great aspects of the film being the focus on female characterizations, and also the breakdown, if you will, of genre stereotypes, and looking at this community and the real life settings and aspects of this community, and how we see the intellectual being treated, and how he's maybe rejected or accepted, and how that acceptance flourishes, and what happens as a consequence. And so I think there's a lot of room for the potential of a lot of deep-rooted political commentary that is maybe hidden or nuanced. So this essay, I think, hints at that very nicely. And then it also talks about the notions of as I was talking about this before, about good guy, bad guy dynamics, and how this seems to upend that, and how this therefore seems to be an ongoing conversation with the more popular modes of cinema at the time, and how this is seeming to be speaking to something of a different nature. And the essay then goes into the production elements of the film. How it mentions how Beyzaie accepted no funding from the state or the commercial sector, which meant that he enjoyed a great deal of independence. It was a lot of hard work because of the limited nature of the funds and resources, but still there was a lot of creativity involved, and there's a lot of making things up. And I think Beyzaie himself, I don't want to suggest that this is in the entirety of the film process, but there are aspects and there are moments that Beyzaie himself refers to where it was very much improvised in terms of camera positioning and the like. And so that kind of spirit, I think, you can feel when you watch the film. There is a real energetic, creative drive that is firing on all thrusters. And I think this tidbit from the essay is very suggestive of that. And it ends with a nice description about the way in which the critics reacted to this film, how the public reacted to this film. I think there was a lot of immediate critical success, but then maybe the public reaction was a little bit more mixed. This is also according to Beyzaie himself. And then we see how the film's legacy has endured despite the subsequent history and the treatment of this film and the film materials in subsequent years. As I say, we are very fortunate to have this included the way it is. So bravo to the essay here, and bravo to the Criterion collection as a whole, because this is another great one to have. Fantastic, fun, lively, emotional work that speaks on so many levels. So this is Beyzaie's great work from 1972. This is Ragbur, or Downpour. Oh yes, and I should point out, I forgot to mention this, but the Beyzaie makes a great interpretation about the meaning of the word downpour, and what this means in terms of rain and intensity of rain, and the briefness of this intense period of rainfall. And this is something that we see play out in a very famous part of the film. And also Beyzaie himself in the interview talks about his own interpretation as to what that means and the significance of that. So it's lovely to hear his interpretation, which is such a great one. And so this is an example of why this Criterion release is so packed full of information and insight. I can't recommend this strongly enough. Please watch this film from Beyzaie, 1972's Downpour. Please watch it. I know you will enjoy it, my friends. So please, I urge you to watch it. So that's it for now. And so, and not just now, but that's it for the set, the Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project #3 set. This is a spectacular set. I am so thrilled that it's here. I can honestly say that it is already one of my favorite releases of the year. It could be perhaps my favorite release of the year. We'll have to wait and see when the year end comes, but right now it's certainly up there. And that's due to the films that are included. That's also due to the supplements. That's also to the great essays, and they are all wonderful and great. You know, if I had to be picky, and I don't want to be, if I had to be picky, I suppose I could say that I would have loved to have seen maybe commentary tracks, but I can't complain too much, because even though we don't get commentary tracks, I think the essays themselves are great, and then you can read them. I've read them over and over and over again, multiple times, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface, and they are leading me, or they can potentially lead me and you, I hope, to more avenues of exploration and research. And so this is a great place to digest the information. This is also a great place to springboard off into other areas of your own research into these aspects of cinema. And so, and also the supplements themselves. And we get a really significant supplement, an interview with a scholar or the filmmaker, as the case may be. So that's really wonderful. But it's in those supplements and in the book. And this is great. I forgot to mention. I guess I don't want to sound too picky. There is maybe one. I did note. I didn't mention this in the video about Pisoche, but there is one minor typo in the essay on Pisoche, but the word Feben in one instance is referred to as F-E-B-E-N, not F-E-B-E-M, as I understand it. So that's just one area where I think there's a typo, but that is a very understandable and acceptable little thing. And so, I mean, I've written documents and I've made 100 typos, and so that's completely understandable, and the point is still well made about the significance of the film Pisoche and the concept of the Febem, F-E-B-E-M. So don't worry about it. It's on page 39 of the booklet if you're interested. But besides that, those are very, very, very minor points. As I say, overall the set is magnificent, and it is, I think, one of, if not my favorite set released this year. And above all else, or amongst that, or related to that, I think that is also due to the films that we are getting. These films are remarkable, and they're magnificent, and they look glorious, and they're being celebrated in this way. It is so just majestic. And they're so varied. I mean, you're getting such a varied work, a library here, and the various places that you are going to visit when you watch these films. It's just wow. And the expressions and the cinematic, the artistic, explosive nature of the dynamism of cinema as we see it expressed in these films just cannot be stated strongly enough. I mean, this is, and I must repeat emphatically, one of the best. So you will really get a lot. I know you will get a lot out of this set. And it is a set, so I know it can tend to be somewhat expensive. So just rest assured that you are going to get a great quality. You're going to get your money's worth. I guarantee it. But if you are also concerned about that, you can always think about getting it during a sale or during a reduced price period or something of that nature, or trying to find the films through other means, either if they're available on the Criterion channel or elsewhere. In any event, just give these films a chance. Get so much out of them, I guarantee it. So, my dear friends, this is Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project #3. And this is the set as a whole, and I was speaking today about the film Downpour. from Beyzaie from 1972. But all in all, great set, great set. Recommend it 1000%. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I really appreciate it. And cheers.